Hey, it's Damon, and I'm back for season 17 of the Who Am I Really podcast. And after 8 years of what will be 275 interviews at the end of this season, my passion for your stories will culminate in a new book, Inside the Adoptee Experience. I've been up before the sun and staying up later than I should, using AI to help me sort through the massive transcript library of documented stories. I spend my dog walks with my girl Freckles and my drives to and from work, re-listening to every show to mentally sort through each episode in their various adoption and reunion experiences. This is a research project like nothing you've ever seen, based on what I've come to appreciate is a research cohort of the adoption journeys from the show. I've joked with people that the work is like putting together a three-dimensional 1,000-piece puzzle because every story has different elements from the one before and the one that follows. One person might have a great relationship with their adoptive mother, a terrible relationship with their adoptive father, use a search angel for search, and be rejected by their birth mother, but be welcomed by their birth father. Another might have all of the opposite things be true. Add in transracial, international, kinship adoptions, mental health challenges, finding a grave, being kept a secret, and an assortment of other complicating factors in adoption. And I'm sure you can see, this is a lot of work, and I love it. So while you haven't heard from me in a while, I've been quiet on social media. Just know that I'm hard at work to deliver what I hope will be a lasting resource for the adoption community and our allies. And it's all thanks to you. You have shared your stories. Every one of you who is listening or has left a comment on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform. And every supporter on Patreon, like Wendy, Jerry, Connor, Carissa, Nisha, and so many more. I hope you're ready as I am for another season. Let's go.
No, it's so hard as an adult to begin a relationship with the person who gave birth to you. She was there when I was born, and then she was gone for the rest of my life. And to try to have to fill in all of that time is challenging.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and today you're going to meet Liz, who spoke to me from Plymouth, Michigan. Growing up, adoption was an open topic until her younger brother's birth changed the family's focus. A series of bad relationships and feeling lost in life led Liz back to school, where she rediscovered writing and the award-winning adoption story she's always had inside. In reunion, Liz found the first mother she always knew wanted to know her, but the deep exploration of her adoption has driven a wedge between her and her older brother. This is Liz's journey. Liz was born in New Jersey, raised on Staten Island, New York. She said that she and her older brother always knew they were adopted. They conceptualized adoption as coming from someone else's stomach, an early understanding of coming from another woman they didn't know. When the subject of adoption came up in their home, the family would discuss it, but they didn't go out of their way to explore the topic either. In 1982, Liz's younger brother was born with special needs. She pointed out that his birth immediately followed an era of what they called deinstitutionalization, where from the 1960s to the 1980s, America began closing large state-run psychiatric hospitals and moving people with mental illness or disabilities into community-based programs. As background, 10 years before, in 1972, journalist Geraldo Rivera exposed the horrors of Willowbrook State School, also there on Staten Island. What was supposed to be a school for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities was revealed to be an overcrowded, filthy facility where children experienced neglect and abuse, from having no clothing to malnourishment, poor medical care, and lack of education. Rivera's expose became a catalyst for disability rights advocacy, lawsuits, and reforms that helped push forward both deinstitutionalization and the movement toward more dignified, independent community living. Sadly, community care was woefully underfunded, leaving many vulnerable people without proper support, many ending up homeless or incarcerated instead of receiving treatment.
Frank was born right after that whole expose, and they were trying, like the whole world was trying to figure out what to do with people like him, with people with disabilities, who they were no longer legally allowed to put in institutions, although they were still trying to. And so he was born in 1982. I was 5 years old. My older brother was 6 years old because we're 14 months apart. And sometime after that, we just kind of stopped talking about adoption because the focus of my family really shifted toward my brother Frank's needs, understandably, and also because my parents had no idea that my other brother and I were going to need lifelong support because of the trauma of maternal separation. They didn't even know that was a thing. They hadn't been given any information. They hadn't been taught anything about adoption or trauma or any of the sort of mental health concerns that might crop up over time. And so it became a thing we stopped talking about until it was a thing we no longer could talk about.
When you say until it was a thing we no longer could, what do you mean you no longer could?
Well, it became a secret again because we hadn't talked about it for so long that it just became a thing that was not openly available as a topic for
Your
conversation.
family fell out of practice of it being
Yeah.
open. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, so much so that like my brother Frank doesn't even know that we're adopted. Like that was never a conversation that,
Really?
yes,
Wow.
yes, it's
You said
wild.
doesn't as in current, present tense.
Present tense, and I'm 48 and he's 43. Like he's a
Holy.
full on adult,
cow.
and we have never had this conversation in my family.
So just to be clear, you and your adopted brother, who's older than you, used to be able to talk about adoption in your family. In the time after your brother was born, biological to both of your parents, the hinges on talking about opening the door to talking about adoption basically rusted closed.
Yeah.
And he never, ever heard that you two are adopted to this day.
Yes.
That's mind blowing to me. Wow.
Yeah.
Really unbelievable. And
I know.
so you are not shy about telling your story. You've got a one-woman show. I'm a little bit confused as to how he doesn't know, and I assume that you will get to some relationship that reveals the reason why. So let me not jump ahead of your story. I'd love to know, before you get to that, what was your relationship with your parents, right? As adoptees, we frequently, and any child looks to their parent to see, how am I like them? How are we different? And I'm curious to know the ways that you saw that you were similar or different from your parents.
Yeah. So I have a good relationship with my parents. We have always been pretty close. And I think, I mean, like, obviously things change over time. And certainly in adulthood, things have shifted in some ways as they've needed to. And I think that the ways that I felt really connected to my parents growing up was that I was really interested in theater. And they were both, when I was young, they were both English and theater teachers. And I grew up going to the rehearsals for them, for the shows that they were directing when they were high school teachers. And I remember I have a lot of fond memories of going to rehearsals with my dad when I was really young before he moved out of the classroom and into some administrative roles. And then as I got older and my mom went back to work, I remember helping her with the productions that she was directing at the high school. And then we went to Broadway all the time. So theater was a thing that I was really interested in, that connected me to them, that I felt like, oh, this is what we have in common. And I don't think as a kid or necessarily I had a really good sense of the disconnects. I just felt that sort of weirdness that I
Hmm.
think most, if not all of us as adoptees feel, that like there's something not quite right. When I knew that I didn't really look like them, I looked similar enough to them, but I knew that I didn't have the same texture of hair and my eye color was not the same shade of green as my dad. And, my skin tone was different than both my mom's and my dad's. Um, and my body type, and as I was different
Hmm.
than my mom's. And I think I tried to connect with him through getting involved in theater and wanting that to be the sort of core of my life early on. And then, of course, I became a teacher, which I didn't want to do because they were teachers and they were always like, oh, you should be a teacher. You should be a teacher. And I was like, no, I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to be an actor. And then it sort of accidentally happened that I ended up becoming a teacher and working as an actor and a teacher for a number of years. I think
Hmm.
those are the sort of the points of connection that we followed similar career paths. But other than that, like there's a lot of divergence.
I can imagine. I'm wondering about your connection to your brother. You've shared this experience as adoptees, and there's a time that you're able to speak openly about it in your family, and then that time closes. I'm wondering about your relationship with your adopted brother.
Yeah, we actually currently don't have one. It's probably one of the most painful parts of my story, and I don't really talk about it a lot because it is so difficult. And part of it is because I have been so open about my experience and because I decided to search for my biological family and made contact with my first mom several years ago and because I needed to know and then because of all the work that I did through my PhD study and my dissertation, where I really dug into not only the psychology of adoption, but the culture and the history of adoption as it was connected to my own internal experience. And then just really very openly have used my story as a platform for social change and for opening up conversation around the internal experience of what it feels like to be adopted. And he and I were really close growing up. We started drifting apart as teenagers. We sort of came back together a little bit in our 20s when I was in college and he was in the military. We did used to talk. He would call me about once a week just to check in. And then as adults, we've really we've really drifted apart and there's stuff that I can't talk about. And it's sad because it's one of the things that I consider the collateral damage of adoption that like he gets to have his experience and I get to have mine and his journey is his journey and my journey is my journey. But we've never been able to have a conversation as adults. Like, and I wish that he were able to have come to me at some point and been curious and asked me, like, hey, Liz, why did you need to do this? Or why did you need to know? Or
Yeah.
why is this important to you? But that was never part of the equation, right? Like that never happened. Instead, he just got real angry. And like I could tell you the objective reasons for everything and like use my family as a case study because there's so many things that like knowing what I know about adoption and trauma and the way it manifests over time. Like I've seen it all. I see it all play out. And like if anybody who's listening, and I know you're familiar with the primal wound, if you think about the two types of adoptees that are described in that book, like we represent both those adoptees, right? He was the one that was always kind of pushing the envelope, and I was the really good compliant one.
Mhm.
So we unfortunately don't have a relationship, and I don't know how to repair that. It's not something that I am responsible for repairing.
Yeah,
Um,
you're right. It's two-sided, and I'm sorry, but you pointed out some interesting things here, and I've also made an observation. One, you pointed out that each of you is allowed to have your own experience. Just because you grew up in the same house doesn't mean that you are forced to agree on how your parents treated the kids because there were three kids and everybody could have been treated differently. So you don't have to come to agreement on that. one person could say, well, mom was great to me. And the other could say, mom was a crazy, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? And you do have to respect the other person's perspective, although that can be incredibly challenging to do. But what I also notice in you lamenting the demise of your story is he really is your brother, a very close relationship. And I'm sure there are folks out there who I've been doing some writing and I tend to call them uninformed outsiders, right? Because they're not inside the adoption constellation, so they don't know. And I could see how an uninformed outsider might just say, well, what difference does it make? You want your brother anyway. You know what I mean? But that's not how families form. That's not how relationships develop. It's not what bonds are. And so to see the pain as you talk about the loss of that relationship it's sad to see. And I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? We have so much loss to contend with as adopted people, and it doesn't ever get easier. Despite all of the therapy that I've had and all of the work that I've done and all of the healing that I have accomplished over time and all of the ways that I have helped other people heal and hold space for other people's stories, it doesn't get any easier to deal with these losses. And I hope that at some point we will, if not be close again, at least have some kind of a relationship. I don't know what that would look like, but that's a part of my life that is hard. I would like to have a relationship with my brother.
I know. I'm so sorry. That's really, really, really difficult. Liz said when she was 38, she hit a wall. She had gotten out of another unhealthy relationship. She was feeling stuck and unhappy in life, and that something had to shift if she was going to move forward on a healthy trajectory. Liz's bad relationship led her to therapy, but those sessions left her feeling worse than when she walked in the door. They just weren't helping. So Liz went back to school.
My first line of defense has always been school, education. It's a great coping mechanism.
It's achievement, right? This is one of the things that adoptees do is I don't feel good, so let me go do something so I can feel good about having completed a task, done a thing,
Right.
achieved a thing.
Yeah. And for me, at this point in time, I had 2 credits left to my master's degree that had been just kind of hanging out on the side for like 12 years.
Oh my God. What?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I had done 28 of my 30 master's credits like in the early 2000s. And then my mom got sick, and then I had some health issues, and then I married a psychopath. Essentially, I married a very unhealthy person who was abusive and had to get out of that and then rebuild my life, and then had some challenges to going back to school, partly because when I was married to my ex-husband, he wouldn't let me go back. And then when I tried to go back a few years later after getting divorced and feeling capable again, I was met with some resistance. And so I kind of put it to the side for another few years. And then I hit this point when I was about 38 where I was, as I said, feeling really stuck. I was like a hamster on a wheel all the time. I was moving really fast, but not getting anywhere. And so I thought, okay, maybe school. And thankfully, the universe shows up in the ways that it needs to many times. And I ran into somebody that I had gone to most of my master's coursework with. And we got to chatting, and I told her that I never finished the last 2 credits. And she was like, that's crazy. You should finish. And I'm like, well, I tried to, but here's what happened. And she was like, let me help you. So all I needed was one signature to get back into the program to finish these last 2 credits. And then what ended up happening was when I met with the coordinator, like a week later, just to figure out what my plan was, she suggested that I take another class, even though I didn't need it. She said, I think you might be interested in taking another class just so you feel like you're part of things again. And I said, okay, that sounds good. She suggested that I take a class in autobiographical writing.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool. Sure. And I had been writing my whole life, but not, like a lot for school, and then like my secret poetry, which I guess we'll talk about at some point.
Mm.
And I had never really taken a formal creative writing class. And I thought, ooh, autobiographical writing. This sounds interesting. We're going to read some memoirs and we're going to write some memoir and we're going to do this cool, like creative nonfiction thing. I
Mhm.
could get into that. And so it was in that class that I figured out that I had a story to tell. And it was because of that class that I eventually decided that I needed to search for my first mom and my biological family.
What was it about the class?
Well, we had to write a long form personal narrative as the final project. And it
Mm.
was like a semester long project. And we were supposed to write multiple drafts. And we had workshops that we were supposed to bring our drafts to. And I had no idea what I was going to write about. No clue. And I signed myself up for the very last possible workshop date. I was like, I don't know, me and the last group. I don't know what I'm doing. And one night, someone else in my class was doing their workshop and reading their draft, and it was a story about her sister and all these details about the way they grew up and how everybody mistook them for twins and how they looked alike and how they had all these same mannerisms. And I just sat there crying. And everybody in class was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I do not think I am okay." And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm adopted and I have no idea who I look like. I have no concept of what it would be like to look at another person who looks like me or sounds like me or like I can share clothes with or whatever, like so this
True
is
mirroring.
yeah, like, and so this is like hitting me in a particular way. And my professor was like, why don't you write about that? And I was like, but I don't know anything. What do you like? What am I supposed to write about? I was like, I was born in New Jersey. That's about all I know. Like I literally had no information. And then she said, well, just think about it. And I said, all right, I will think about it. And then when I went home that night after class, I did have my non-identifying information. I was thinking about it and I was like, maybe I'll go back to that and I'll see if there's anything in there. And so like I pulled out this file folder that I had stashed, on a shelf that I had had for like at this point about 18 years. And I kind of started rifling through it and thinking like, okay, maybe there's something in here. Maybe there is a story. And that's what I decided to write about. And when I went through that file folder, one of the one of the pieces of paper in there was a list of suggested reading. One of the books was The Primal Wound. And then it was like Journey of the Adopted Self and, all the usual suspects. But I remember thinking like, 18 or whatever years earlier when I got that initially, I was in college and I remember thinking like, oh, I'm not wounded. What do they mean? Like, I don't need to read these books. But at this point, I was like, oh, maybe I should read these books.
Right.
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 And because I was also trying to figure out, like, and make sense of myself and my story, and it occurred to me as I was struggling through the process of figuring out what my story was, that maybe doing some of this reading was going to help me understand something about being adopted that I hadn't realized was there, um, which it did. Because I read The Primal Wound and I was like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy.
That's so interesting.
I now understand why I feel the way I felt. And then I started to figure out, and then I started to realize all of my patterns, right? Because at the beginning of this story that I'm telling you is that I felt stuck and I realized, I had just gotten out of another unhealthy relationship. And then I started to realize like, oh, this is a pattern for me.
Uh-huh.
And then I was like, I got to figure out why I have this pattern. And then I was like, maybe it's connected to being adopted. And then I started reading the books. And then I started figuring out how to write my story
Mm.
about my experience, not the story that I had been told my whole life. And the act of struggling through that was really what helped me find my voice.
Let me pause you for a moment before we go down this road. I just want to hear about you talked about the reading as important for opening your mind,
Mhm.
the writing as being award winning. I'm curious about the catharsis of the writing. What did it feel like to actually write this stuff down and now see, oh crap, these are my actual feelings on the page. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Well, this has been a huge part of my journey, a huge part of my healing and my discovery process of my authentic self. What really started with that first piece of writing, which is called Unanswered Questions. And just interesting little tidbit, there's a lot of adoptee memoirs and nonfiction that I've read, and that phrase unanswered questions comes up in almost all of them. We all say it in some fashion.
I have to go back to
Um,
mine now and see if I said
I bet you did.
I, I'm
Bet you did.
definitely gonna go look.
Yeah, I track it. I'm like, oh, there's another one.
There's another
But
one.
that first experience of struggling through that story was really profound for me because it meant that I did have a story. And that first story was really the foundation that helped me then to continue to tell that story and actually continue to get at the truth that had been inside me for so long. And part of that truth actually was already written in like decades worth of poems that I had stashed in little notebooks.
Oh, interesting.
And when I started my PhD work, one of the classes that I took in the first couple of semesters was a class called Poetry and Healing. And in that class, I realized there was a whole field dedicated to therapeutic writing, expressive writing as a therapeutic tool, but also poetry specifically as a tool for navigating and processing trauma. And I was like, oh, this is the thing I have been doing my whole life.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I can't help thinking this is a recurring theme as well for a lot of adoptees is we don't have the language for what we're feeling, what we're doing. And I thought of this, it triggered for me before, but it wasn't a good time to interject. But you were talking about some feelings that you had about not necessarily feeling completely connected to your parents, right? You guys kind of looked alike and you kind of did some things that were similar, but you, but what triggered for me in that moment of you describing that is she didn't have the language at the time to describe these differences that she's feeling between herself and her parents and her siblings, etc. And you've just did it again is you realized that while you were expressing yourself through these poems, you didn't have the language to say, I'm feeling something here that I need to explore. You were just doing it because it was pouring out of you. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that exactly. And that's exactly it. It's that eternal separation. That's a pre-verbal wound, right? Like that happens before we have language to explain it. So obviously we don't have the language. And then when you grow up in a family who is very loving and very supportive in all of the external ways, but also doesn't have the language to talk about these experiences. So that's what I was saying earlier. Like we just stopped talking about it because nobody had the language.
That's
Nobody was supported enough to
Mm,
able to continue the conversation.
yeah.
And then as I got older and I started having these feelings, I couldn't figure out that they were feelings that attached to the fact that I felt different. Like it took me until I started writing in adulthood to start to piece together that 14-year-old Liz was hurting and
Mhm.
sad and needed to talk about why her mother didn't want her. And I put that in quotes because I found out that she did very much want me.
Mm,
She just had no choice. So the writing for me came out of a need to express the inexpressible.
mm,
Right. And I had a very smart teacher and coach who I'm still in touch with to this day, Mr. Anthony. His name is George Anthony,
mm.
who's the one who suggested I start writing poetry, which at 14 years old, I thought was the stupidest thing I had ever heard. But then I quickly amended my thinking and started writing. And it was writing, and you've seen Unmothered, right? So you kind of know the story a little bit, but that was writing I never shared with anybody. But if anybody had seen that, or if anybody had asked me, what are you writing? They might have been able to look at that very first poem, The Little Girl Inside of Me, and they might have been able to say, hey, Liz, tell us about that little girl, right?
Mhm.
And then we might have had the language. We might have started to develop the language we needed.
Yeah.
And so for me, the struggle to tell my own story and then the return to all of those old poems to figure out what the deeper story was really the path that I found to healing and a greater sense of wholeness, because it was all there. I'd written this and talked about it in various places, but like I said, those poems, that was me writing my future.
That is
Because
so.
when I went back to them, I was like, oh, look at me talking about my pain and my grief and my loss and
Uh-huh.
all of the like 7 core issues, right? Like it was all there in the images and in the tone of the poems and in like one poem, Why Have You Abandoned Me? Like, hello.
Wow. That's so funny. We just got through saying that you didn't have the language when in fact, in many ways
Yeah.
you did. You just didn't know that you were doing it. A year later, Liz had moved out of New York. She was teaching again, and she had won an award for her personal narrative, which she said was validating that she truly had a story to tell. It was an important one, and people wanted to hear it. At the same time, she was completing her PhD and had gotten involved in some adoptee Facebook groups online. In one of them, someone posted about New Jersey changing their laws for access to an adoptee's original birth certificate, or OBC. She decided to apply to receive her own documentation. One snowy day, several months later, Liz was working from home. It was her birthday, and she and her partner Jeremy were supposed to go out for dinner to celebrate her life. But she decided she wanted to stay in, snuggle up with some carry-out Thai food, and just be together on the couch. She called Jeremy to pick up the food on the way home.
And then a little while after that, I put on my boots and went out to get the mail. And I was walking back up to the apartment and I was like, oh, the New Jersey Department of Health.
Yeah.
So that envelope sat on the counter for like the next 4 hours-ish until for the rest of the day until he came home, because I was not opening that by myself. But there it was on my 40th birthday.
That's unbelievable timing.
And so
Good to see. Well, pause for a moment. So what that tells me, though, is you said you could only get access if the records are sort of unrestricted, unredacted. So that tells you that long time ago, somebody chose not to keep themselves closed off from future identification. That must have been really interesting to think about.
Yeah, because when I opened it, my first mom's name was on my birth certificate. There was no name of a father, so I still actually don't know who my biological father is, but I had her name. And so very quickly after opening that envelope that night, we went online, we went on Facebook and we did a little bit of digging, and it was pretty easy to find her. We were like, okay, this has to be her. And also piecing together what other information I had from my non-identifying information, where I was kind of like, okay, she's got this many sisters and this many brothers. And so like on Facebook, I could sort of make those connections and sort of count who was who. And also I had just prior to this done a DNA test through Ancestry. And so had already gotten those results back and had several messages kind of out in the world. And one of them was to who I believed was her older sister, because the DNA match was so close. And I knew it wasn't her, but I'm like, I think I think your sister might be my mother. And I was waiting. I hadn't heard back yet, but this was all kind of happening at the same time. And then once I had her name and we cross-checked some things and I figured out, that it was her. Then I took a few days a week to figure out what I was going to say. And then I sent a message on Facebook, and then I hand wrote the same message and put it in the mail to her in case she didn't see the Facebook message. And then a couple days later, she responded to my Facebook message.
You said you
Um,
hand wrote the note. How come you didn't just type it?
I'm a handwriting person. Even when I write and when I run my writing programs, like I encourage people to write by hand because of the process of handwriting. has some different neurological links than typing. I also didn't have an email address, and like I felt it was so impersonal to print something. In retrospect, if I think about it, I think that there was probably some part of me that was like, no, I need to write this so that she sees my handwriting and that it's a personal note and that it's coming from me, and it's not just a typed form letter or something, because I had already typed the message
Yeah.
on the screen, right? And it felt important to me and then to copy it.
I did the same exact thing. Typed it on the screen and then wrote it in my own hand because I believed that there was something very personal about seeing how a person writes. And,
Mhm.
and having taken it, there's also a subliminal message of the time that you took to intentionally sit down and put your cursive or whatever your writing style is into expressing yourself. That's not, it's super quick. There's like sit down, type an email, press backspace, delete, and like fix some things. But to see someone's handwriting and a potential scratch out, and like that clearly took some time. They are intentional about writing to me. I know exactly where you're coming from in terms of that's why I asked, because I was wondering if we had the same feeling about it.
Yeah, for
So she
sure.
responds to your Facebook message, and what happens next?
And she, basically said, I've been waiting for this day for 40 years.
Ugh.
And, and the thing that I somehow always knew, I have always known that if I found her, she would want to know me. I can't explain why I have always known this, but I have just always known this. Like I have just known it in my bones. That is a thing that I knew my whole life. Every time I thought about her, like, who is she? Where is she? I always knew that at some point, if I was able to search for her and find her, I knew that she would want to know me. And she did. And then we started messaging back and forth. And then we graduated to email. And then the emails were really long. So that we started talking on the phone a little bit and just starting to reconnect the dots, I guess. And it's so hard as an adult to begin a relationship with the person who gave birth to you. She was there when I was born, and then she was gone for the rest of my life. And to try to have to fill in all of that time is challenging. And it has been a good relationship. We do have a good relationship, but it's been a slowly growing relationship
No. So
because time.
yeah, it does. It's right. What? So you Facebook messaged, you started writing long emails. Did you say you started talking on the phone?
Mhm.
So tell me about this first call.
I'm going to try to remember. I'm sure that I was very nervous. I'm sure that I was like, oh, what are we going to talk about? But from that first call, it has always been very easy to talk.
Mhm.
We don't struggle to talk to one another. And she has been very open about everything, as much as she remembers at any rate. And there's a lot that I think I'm still hesitant to ask because I'm not even sure sometimes what to ask. And sometimes it's just enough to have a conversation and just like bitch about work
Mhm.
and have her be like, oh yeah, I get it. Or, but like we sort of, we understand each other. We have very similar worldviews, I will say, which is really interesting. And so I think that's part of why it was so easy for us to connect because we read the same kind of books and we are interested in the same kind of ideas about the world. And so there's not a lot I have to explain to her about who I am or why this thing is important to me, right? Like I don't have to explain why feminism is important to me
Yeah.
because feminism is important to her.
Liz and her birth mother had too much to say, so they began speaking on the phone, reconnecting and getting to know one another. In 2017, Liz was visiting her family back in New York. Her first mom, Mary, still lived in Freehold, New Jersey, the same town where she grew up. She had been married, raised Liz's half-siblings, and gotten a divorce, then reverted back to her maiden name so that if Liz ever came looking, Mary could easily be found. Liz and her friend Kathleen had made plans to get together one day after work, except Kathleen didn't have a whole lot of time to stay in New York. She had to get back to Freehold for her kids, but she really wanted Liz to make her way down so they could spend more time together while she was in town. Liz had to borrow her mom's car to meet up with her friend a little later. As she's driving over the bridge from New York to New Jersey, it hit her that both women, Mary and Kathleen, both live in Freehold. When Liz pulled into the restaurant parking lot to meet Kathleen, she took a moment to map the distance to Mary's address to see how far away she lived, and it was only 5 minutes down the road.
So I'm like, maybe I should text her and tell her I'm down the road.
Oh my gosh.
And so I get into the restaurant and I'm like, Kathleen, this is the situation. What should I do? She's like, did you text her? And I'm like, I think I'm gonna. She's like, do it. So I texted Mary and I'm like, hey, I know this is totally out of the blue and feel free to say no, but I'm down the road having dinner with my friend. And if you're around and you want to meet in person, like maybe we could get a cup of coffee or some later. And, and I send, and then we're having dinner and I'm like waiting for the reply. And I'm like, is she going to reply? And then we had fortunately, like we went to dinner and then we went to get a pedicure. So we had some time kill in between. And then I got a response from Mary and she was like, oh my God, absolutely. What about if we meet there was a coffee and dessert place. And so a little bit later that night, we went to this place and then she showed up and my friend was there and my friend got to see the reunion and it was good because I wasn't by myself. And it was one of those situations where it just unfolded the way that it did. And I didn't have to think too much. It wasn't like I had planned this 3 months earlier and then I had to wait and do that whole like anticipation thing.
Yeah.
Which happens for a lot of us, right? We end up making the plans to meet, but then it's like some time in the future and you have to like deal with that in between. I didn't have to do that. I just was like, okay, this is here. Okay, I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
Just
dive
jump
right in.
in.
That is absolutely unbelievable. Just happenstance that you are meeting your friend Kathleen for dinner and you realize where you are and you go, wait.
Mm-hmm.
This might be an opportunity. Wow. Not too different from us tonight when we decided that we were going to get together to like, you want to chat? Sure. I think it can happen tonight. That's crazy, but very, very obviously. So tell me, you are in this coffee shop. Tell me about meeting her, seeing her. What was this? Tell me about your emotions of these moments of being face to face with this woman you haven't seen in 40 years.
Yeah. I mean, I was nervous. I was excited. I was kind of like going on a blind date, right? You're like,
How do I look? What am I going to say?
person gonna like, and I just remember like her walking in and then us hugging each other. And then we both started crying. And my friend was there with her girls. And there was another couple sitting in the cafe who were watching. And an hour or so later, after my friend had left and after, Mary and I had been sitting talking for a while, they asked us, they said, is there like a special, I don't know if they said the words reunion. And she said, yeah, this is my daughter. And I said, but this is the first time we're meeting. I was adopted and these people were like crying. But I just remember like once we hugged, it was just like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt a kind of sense of calm and peace. And then we just sat down and started talking. And while we were talking, I noticed that she uses her hands the same way that I do. And like that was a thing that I remember focusing on, that I was like, oh, we do the same thing with our hands.
So cool.
And we just sat there for probably 2 or 3 hours. I don't even know. talking.
That's unreal. Wow. You, how was it to leave that coffee shop?
I don't even remember. It was probably like, I think we had to leave because they were closing, actually.
Yeah, we didn't leave it.
Probably
It's
like,
just now.
we gotta go home, but you can't stay here, like,
You guys want to talk in the car? Because I got to clean up.
yeah,
Um,
we're like, "Oh, maybe we should go,
yeah, the question on my mind is, you have borrowed your mother's car to go have dinner with a friend,
Mhm.
now turned that car ride into a reunion with your first mother. How was it walking in the house after this reunion that you literally didn't even plan?
It was fine. I don't even I don't even remember what it was like walking back into my parents' house, other than, like, holding on to all this myself, and, like, I had, and Kathleen had checked in on me, and, like, I had talked to her on the way home, and it was something that I knew that at the time, like, that I needed to keep for myself. It wasn't a conversation that I was prepared to have, and I think that my parents might not even have been home when I got home that night. I can't even quite recall the particular details, but I think they may not have even been home because I don't have any recollection of, you know, I
No. Yeah. You
like, I
walked
would have remembered, like, if
in,
somebody was like,
yeah.
"Oh."
Would totally remember being like, "Oh, they're gonna see it on my face." You would if they were
Yeah.
there, be able to remember, yeah. So how was your relationship with your first mother in the aftermath?
It's been good. Like I said, it's been a slowly progressing relationship, but when I have, like, an open door, what I call an open door policy is, like, we know we can call or text each other whenever, and we do, like, we'll check in, send messages, and she sends Christmas gifts and birthday gifts and holiday wishes and all those things. And, we talk periodically, not as often as we could. And she's always like, "I'm so sorry we don't talk more. I have to be better about that." Like, it's okay. We talk when we talk. And, I know that if I want to talk, I can call you, and that if you're not available, you'll call me back. And, like, it's just good.
Yeah.
It's
That's really nice.
complicated, right? It's complicated because there's a lot that she still feels guilty about, and she apologizes for a lot of things that she doesn't need to apologize for, but, that's also, like, part of being a woman. We apologize for shit we don't need to. And in her case, she's a woman who also really was faced with a shitty predicament where she was not supported to keep and parent her child, and she didn't have any options.
Yeah, do you wanna say a little bit about the situation for your relinquishment? Is that something that you share?
Yeah, this is what she has shared with me, is that very early on in our meeting, and when we started talking, she said to me, "I did not, I wanted to keep you." And and she has said to me multiple times over the years, "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." But she did not have any options. Her family refused to support her. Her younger sister had been forced into an abortion the year before, something she told me. I don't know the details of that, and she mentioned that, and that was a really difficult thing for her to witness because her sister wasn't given any options. Like, there was no choice there. It was just like, this is what you're doing. And she didn't believe in abortion. She didn't, like, that was not something she felt comfortable with. And also, she never said this, but this is what I think. I think that she thought that there was possibly a way, that she wasn't even going to consider abortion because she thought, like, "Oh, I can figure this out, or I really want to have this baby and it's going to be okay." But then the boyfriend that she was with when she found out she was pregnant refused to raise another man's child. And that, in combination with her family saying, "Well, we're not going to support you. Like, we're not going to help you if you decide to have this baby. And so she didn't have a place to live and she wasn't going to have any financial support. And so she had this boyfriend and she thought, well, maybe this is she has shared this with me in different ways over the years, but that she felt like this was maybe the way that she was going to find some security was by being in this relationship. And then he finally said, well, I'm not going to raise another man's child. And so he's the one that actually went to the adoption agency with her.
Really?
And so, so in Unmothered, when I say the paperwork is a lie, it's because for the 20 years that I had my non-identifying information, half the information on there is a lie because he's not my biological father. But his information was what was on that paperwork.
Interesting. Wow. His information was on the adoption paperwork. Your birth certificate had no name in the father position on the form. Fascinating. Liz mentioned that she doesn't know who her birth father is.
I don't. And I have a little piece of paper that with a name on it that Mary gave me, about 6 years ago. That's still in my wallet. And I haven't done anything with it because I'm not even 100% sure it's the right person.
When Liz initially connected with her first mother, Mary, the woman couldn't remember Liz's birth father's name, and it took a while for her memory to come back. Liz's half-sister tried to help her figure things out with her own father's help, but unfortunately, her sister died unexpectedly. So Liz's interest in finding the man faded.
If I'm being really honest, I never had as big of a desire to know who my biological father was as much as I wanted to know who my mother was. And so that's just a kind of thing that I'm still kind of like, I don't know if I want to open that can of worms. And there's a lot of people, a lot of adoptees that I know that are like, oh, but my biological father has been so open and so welcoming and it's been the greatest thing. And I just,
Not all.
in the same way that I knew that my mother would want to know me, that my first mom would want to know me, I just have this feeling like this is not a thing that I need to do. And maybe I haven't fully realized it until just this moment in this conversation, but like, there's people keep asking me about that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And maybe it's that same conviction.
I'm going to tell you something from my own experience. My birth mother told me that she had got pregnant accidentally. I later figured out that she was probably pregnant at the time she started dating the guy who she ended up saying was my birth father. And she was consistent in every single story she ever told her entire life. She said it was the second guy.
Yeah.
Because she was already pregnant at the time that she started dating him. And of course, that's who you would affiliate your pregnancy with, is the person you're with. The reason I raise that is because he was not supportive of her at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, you know what? He didn't help her then. He doesn't get to know me now. So I said, forget it. I'm out. I got everything I needed for my reunion with my birth mother until she passed away. And then I thought, do I want to walk this life and never have been face to face with my biological father? I mean, it took two people to bring me here, and I've had an amazing reunion with one. And frankly, I'm good. Like I'm strong enough now that whatever happens next, I'm probably going to be just fine. So I went for it. And it was only because I knew that I couldn't hurt her by reuniting with this guy who was not supportive of her back then. So all I'm trying to say is that the passage of time can change a person's perspective on wanting to open that can of worms or not. And, you know, you may want to go with your gut and say, my gut told me my first mother would absolutely want to know me. I was right. My gut tells me not to do this or not to do this right now. And I'm going to go with my gut. I'm batting 1,000 on my gut. And so I can appreciate you in either position that you're thinking through this.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm pretty sure that whoever he is, he has no idea that I exist.
I was wondering that.
Mary did tell me at one point a couple of years ago that she tried reaching out to him to tell him. And I don't know whatever happened. She never brought it up again. So my assumption is that she never, that he never called her back, or that it just went nowhere. And it's like, so, that's a weird thing too. Cause like, if he doesn't know I exist and then I show up and also like, I am me. And if it's the person that I think it might be based on what my sister and I were able to find out, I don't feel entirely comfortable, like showing up as me with the person that I think he might be.
What I think I hear you saying is you don't feel like your ideologies are aligned
Yeah.
such that it's going to potentially, if it's the person you think it is, that it's going to potentially invite chaos, conflict, undue stress.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. And I've had so much chaos and conflict in my life that that I'm not willing to invite more in. And so, it's a thing that's sort of hanging out in the background.
Mm-hmm. But you know what's interesting to me is his name is in your wallet still.
Because I just kind of put it there and I was like, well, let me just keep this here.
That's really fascinating. Huh.
I did switch wallets, and that just made me think like, oh, I don't think I took it out of the old wallet. So maybe I should do that before I throw it
Yeah,
out.
right. Where you just start throwing away chunk and you forget it's in there. Holy mackerel. It's a good thing we had this conversation, huh, Liz? I was very curious how Liz shared her maternal reunion with her adoptive mother. When I asked, she chuckled a bit and admitted it took 2 years to open up to her adoptive parents. She had moved to Utah and her parents were back in New York. While she was navigating the relationship with Mary, Liz was also working on her PhD, studying adoption, understanding the social and cultural narratives in adoption, and specifically how they applied to her own story. Her deep dives into the topic were hard for her adoptive parents, and they struggled with her probing focus on adoption.
And my dad kept saying to me, like, for the first 2+ years of my 3-year PhD program, he was like, so this adoption stuff is just on the side though, right? And I was like, no, Dad, like, this is what I'm working on. This is like my work.
As in, this is my life,
Yeah.
right? This is a central narrative to the reason why you and I even know each other at all.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
And like, and I love my parents dearly, but sometimes they are so blind,
Oblivious.
right? And so we kept having these difficult conversations. And then I started writing on Mother. And that brought up some more difficult conversations. And then my partner Jeremy and I went to visit in December of 2019. So this is now like just about 2 years from the time that I first made contact with Mary. We went to visit and we were having breakfast with my parents one morning. And I'm not even quite sure how it happened, but the conversation kind of turned and it opened up the ability for me to say, well, actually, I want to share something with you. And I've been in touch with my first mom. Her name is Mary. And then they were like, why did you wait so long to tell us? And like, it was a very complicated conversation, like many conversations that we have to have as adopted people with our parents, with so many people, because they were like, I think they were feeling a tension of like, well, why didn't you tell us? But tell us about her. And like, and then they were a little weird. And then I was trying to like, well, I needed some time. Right. And then I had to explain to them, like, I needed some time to figure out how I felt about all this and what this relationship was going to be. Like, it's a lot. And I wasn't, like, and also this is not a conversation that I felt like I could have with you over the phone. And so now I'm glad that we're having it in person.
Mhm.
That was part of it too, is that I really felt that it was not the kind of thing that I wanted to talk about on the phone. Partially because often my parents are very active and they're in the car, or, like they'll pick up the phone when they're running errands in the grocery store. And I'm not going to be like, hey, by the way, let me tell you about my reunion when my mother's in the middle of Target buying
Right.
groceries.
Yeah. Let me know when you're done checking out because I got something to tell you.
Right. Like that's
Yeah.
not the way that this conversation needed to happen. And so, it was another one of those things of this has been such a big part of my journey too, has been really learning to listen to myself and trust myself around like what the right time is for
That's
certain
really cool.
things. And so it took me this extended period of time because it wasn't the right time for me,
Mm-hmm.
you
Wow.
know?
No, and that's really important. The adoptee tends to be on everybody else's terms and agenda.
Hmm.
So making it about when you're ready to do something is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Before we get to unmothered, I want to ask something it's been a repetitive theme that you've dropped here as we've been talking. You've said more than once, the universe handed you X in a very positive light.
Hmm.
But I couldn't help thinking, how does one reconcile that the universe also handed you into adoption?
Yeah. That's the both and, right? That's the complexity of the both and of adoption, right? It's that I'm not particularly religious, but I'm very spiritual, and I do believe that the universe, there is a higher power, that there is like higher energy in the universe that supports and guides us into things. And I don't know that I have a specific answer for like the universe handed me into adoption. Like I might have to think about that, and maybe I'll get to it as I talk through this. But if I think about key moments in my life, there are really specific things that have happened that have been clearly been the universe going, here's what you need. Let me give that to you. And just opening the doors wide. I do think, in that same vein, like I ended up in a good family. I ended up in a life that enabled me to have access to education and access to the arts and to creativity and to being able to explore the world in many, many ways. And then those are things I might not have had access to if I had stayed in my family of origin.
Right.
It's a different life, right? We say this all the time. It's not necessarily a better life. It's a different life.
That's right. Yeah. I didn't want to be controversial. It was just an obvious juxtaposition of your journey in adoption and the paths that the universe put in front of you to find your way to the class, find your way to reunion, but
Mm.
that you would not have had any of those decisions to make, realizations, any of it, had the universe not placed you in the path of adoption in the first place. So
Right.
I appreciate you thinking that through in real time. I'm going to let you go, but I want you to tell everybody you've mentioned more than once, unmothered. Tell
Yes.
me, what is unmothered and why is it important to you?
Unmothered is my award-winning solo show that originally started as part of my dissertation and is now a big part of the work that I'm super proud to have out in the world, because it is my journey to finding myself and my voice, but it is as much my story as it is a story of the internal experience of what it feels like to be adopted for all of us. And I say this because every single adoptee that has seen it, and you've seen it, has said to me, "Oh my God, you just said all of the things that I felt my whole life but could never put words to." And so Unmothered it's my love letter to myself, and it's my love letter to every other adoptee in the world, so that we know, that other adoptees know that they are seen, heard, and understood, and that they're not alone in their feelings and in their experiences. And I am fortunate to get to perform it a couple times a year in collaboration with Louise and Sarah and Adoption, the Making of Me podcast, at the live podcast events, which you're part of. And every time it shifts and changes and different folks are there, and it's an amazing way for us to come together as a community. But also I've performed it at conferences. I have performed it at theater festivals. I
That's
take it
incredible.
anywhere.
That's amazing, right? Because it's part of you, right? That's really, really awesome. You also do a writing workshop for anybody who wants to get involved with you and your writing workshop and the
Yeah.
support they might need to express themselves. How do people get in touch with you?
So people can get in touch with me really simply on my website, lizdebetta.com. And what I do is not just any other writing workshop. It is deeply intentional healing work. And so for adoptees that are looking for a way to heal and a way to get into the parts that need attention, I'm here to support and hold space. And I do that one-on-one and in groups. So sometimes healing always happens in community, right? So, whether you're looking for a one-on-one or a group experience, I have all of that available.
Thank you, Liz Debetta. You are amazing. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me. I've really learned a lot more about you that I didn't realize was part of your story. So I'm so glad we finally did this. I'm looking forward to seeing you in September on the 13th here in Washington, D.C. It's going to be amazing. Thank you, Dr. Liz Debetta, for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Love you so much.
You too. Love you. Hey, it's me. Liz said her family used to talk about adoption until their shared focus shifted to her brother's care, rusting the formerly open door on the topic closed. It was hard to hear the pain in Liz's voice as she talked about the loss of her relationship with her older brother. Unfortunately, that is part of the collateral damage of adoption reunion. Some people are able to reconcile your needs against their own, while others simply cannot get the calculations to work for them. When Liz and I were texting to schedule her interview, we realized our best time was to jump in that very night. A similar scenario to her reunion with Mary. The opportunity presented itself and Liz jumped in. Liz said she couldn't explain it, but she always knew that her first mother would want to know her, and I'm so glad that her intuition turned out to be true. Dr. Liz Debetta has a PhD in interdisciplinary studies with certificates in women's and gender studies and creative writing. You can find her writing workshops and book her to perform her award-winning one-woman play, Unmothered, at lizdebetta.com. When you land on the site, Liz says, you no longer have to stay small to stay safe. I love that. You can meet Liz and me on September 13th here in Washington, D.C., where she's performing Unmothered as part of the Adoption, The Making of Me podcast live event. Sarah and Louise are bringing adoptees together in community in a one-of-a-kind experience. You can learn more at eventbrite.com. I'll be emceeing, and I hope you'll join us there. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Liz's journey that inspired you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn. Who am I really?